get going. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon session in which we're going to hopefully bury for good the image of farming as a backward-looking, low-tech, sleepy sector, sort of low-skill, slow-moving, something only for people who are too stupid to do anything else. I'm exaggerating to make the point, but there is a bit of an image of farming that reinforced by all the adverts we see from the supermarkets and so on, that it's sort of people with straw in their mouths and all very idyllic and lovely, but not high tech, not the sort of place you'd want to work if you were ambitious science and technology graduate. So hopefully we're going to destroy that image for good this afternoon. So my name's Karl Schneider. I'm the editor of Farmers Weekly, and I'll be chairing the session. And we're going to hear in this session about some of the really exciting science and technology developments that are taking place in agriculture today, and look at some of the opportunities that means are opening up for scientists, engineers, data scientists, and lots of other disciplines which in the past had little or no relevance to farming. So let me introduce our panel who are going to help us on this journey. In no particular order, and if you can wave when I say your name so that people know who is who. We've got Kit Franklin, who is the senior lecturer in agricultural engineering at Harper University. Hi, Kit. He's an expert on farm robotics and automation, and he led the world-famous hands-free hectare project to grow crops in a field without a human being setting foot in that field. Now that project is now bigger than a hectare and it's still ongoing. But Kit's a real expert on farm robotics. He was telling me earlier he had 1,000 people watching his session on the main stage earlier today. Second, we have Dana McGregor. Hi, Dana. Dana is a plant molecular geneticist working at Rothamsted Research. That's the world's oldest agricultural research centre, and again has a global reputation. And Dana is currently working on using our sort of vastly improved understanding of crop genetics to tackle weeds, the bane of farmers' lives. And there's one in particular called blackgrass that I know he's working on. That if you can solve that problem, you'll have farmers queuing up to kiss you, Dana, I know. Third, we have Katharina Giebel. Hi, Katharina. Katharina is a lecturer in sustainable livestock production at the Royal Agricultural University in Cirencester, and there she's working on applying smart technology to livestock farming. I think we often, when we think about robotics and technology, we tend to think about arable farming, but actually there's some really interesting things happening in livestock farming as well, that hopefully we're going to hear about in a bit. Now, there's an empty space at the moment, but I'm hoping that very shortly we'll be joined by Tim Mordan, who's the Deputy Director at Defra, the UK Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And Tim leads up the work taking place to improve farm productivity. So that covers things like the application of new technologies, but also looking at the skills we need in agriculture in future, which, as I said earlier, aren't the same necessarily as the ones we needed in the past, to make the most of these new technologies. And last but not least, the youngest member of our panel is Josie Troop. Hi, Josie. Josie is a recent graduate from Harper University. So Kit at the bottom left, he's already at Harper. And Josie has just started on a career in agriculture. So she's going to talk a bit about some of the opportunities that are available to graduates in agriculture and a bit about what it's like to work in this rapidly changing field. So a great mix of skills. This is going to be very informal. I'm going to just talk to the people. We're going to have a chat about some exciting things that are going on, and then we'll hopefully be able to take some of the questions that will appear in the panel off to the side. So, Kit, let me start with you, because in terms of capturing the public imagination, I think some of the work going on in terms of robots on farms has got a lot of publicity and generated a lot of excitement. So, tell me some of the exciting things that are happening in farm robotics. What are robots going to be doing on our farms in future?
Well, for me, it's I mostly concentrate on field crop production. And for me, robotics are a way of reducing our environmental impact whilst maintaining the high levels of yield that we currently create. So using robotics to identify weeds and pests and apply chemicals and treatments to just those weeds and pests rather than to fields as a whole. So that's, for me, an exciting opportunity where none of this technology is for technology's sake. It's always trying to drive farming forwards and be better, more efficient, but really critically more sustainable environmentally as well. So for me, that's really amazing stuff. seriously clever things being used in terms of machine vision and AI. The sort of things that you think are the realms of the Googles and Amazons and Teslas of this world are happening on farm. And people just completely oversee that most of the time. So yeah, that's quite exciting. Other than that, I mean, I think all things data, and from that precision, on the back of that comes a whole lot of data, a whole lot of information, and there's all sorts of work by plant scientists and animal scientists looking to utilize this data that engineers like me are creating. We're creating lots of data, so now we're trying to hand that in a systems approach, because we don't like to work in silos anymore, I hope, to our animal and plant scientists to take our engineering data and turn it into information and knowledge to, again, push sustainability forwards.
So one of the visions, I think, that people are painting of how farming might look in future is a world where, as you said, there's massive amounts of data. And rather than, for example, treating problems like crop disease by spraying crops in sort of big lumps, we'll have, firstly, we'll be capturing data on individual plants, so we'll know which plants have the problem and which ones don't, and then be able to apply a treatment, whether that's a drop of a chemical on a leaf or zapping a weed with a laser, very precisely, again, on a plant by plant level. How realistic is that, and what sort of scale of improvement? And so, for example, in terms of the use of chemicals, what sort of scale of improvement are we talking about if we can turn that into reality?
Yeah, so it certainly is possible. I mean, the ideas you're talking about were, the stuff of academics from the 90s and 2000s, and it was very aspirational at that point. There's a comment in the comment stream about robotic milking, and for someone who works in the crop world, I am envious of the animal world. At the moment, we treat every animal as an individual. I know every animal in my herd or flock, and I can treat them individually, and the robotic milking machines do just that. They collect data on every animal, and I can therefore manage that animal far more sustainably, far more accurately. So we're envious of that in a crop world, and the idea of could we do the same thing with a field of crops, could we treat every plant as an individual, was very much an academic idea 10 years ago. But now where we're sat, we really are doing that. We have now camera systems on scouting robots on drones that we can use AI to identify and map weeds, weed by weed in a field. That's the work that sort of small robot are doing a lot of. But also, it doesn't have to be as complicated as that. Even we've got in crops that are wider spaced, so maybe not a cereal crop, but maybe something like a head of lettuce or maize crop or something where the population is maybe 10 plants per meter. I can fly a drone over that field, I can take images of that field, and I can count how many plants I've got. So therefore, I can market my yield more effectively because I know how much I'm going to harvest. I can target my fertilizer inputs better because I know where maybe I've got a lower population than another area, so that's going to require, lower area of population is going to require less feeding essentially. So this really is happening. It was an academic idea 15 years ago, and now with drones and AI and machine vision, it's happening. Yeah.
I've been up to Harper Adams a number of times in the last few years, and it's really impressive what you've got working in the lab. I've seen the video you've produced of laser weeding, where in real time you've got a contraption going over the crops with cameras looking at individual plants and deciding that's a crop, that's a weed, and then a laser tuning onto the weeds and zapping them in real time as it goes across. So you've got that working in the lab. I know it's hard to predict these things, but how long before I'm going to see that in a field in Britain?
So the laser thing was one of the first things I did as an academic after graduating and coming back to Harper as a researcher myself. And it works. I mean, we have a system we can take out into a field, we can drive over a field, and we can laser weeds. I mean, it is real. The prohibiting factor there is the cost of lasers, which are expensive, and therefore the output that a laser can do doesn't at the moment financially weigh up for how much that thing costs. In terms of can we use that same technology to target a drop of chemical, again, there's a lot of companies that are releasing systems that do that. There's a big company called Weed Seeker, a big piece of technology called Weed Seeker. It's not as precise as plant, like the leaf by leaf stuff that we were doing, but it is going, right, here's a stubble and there's a weed, I'll just spray that weed rather than spray the whole stubble. So that is commercial. I mean, there's companies selling that. Garford here in the UK, Garford RoboHo is a hoeing machine that's existed since 2005. You've been able to buy that, and that again identifies crop and then hoes everything else, and it misses the crop. And that technology is 15 years old. As I say, it's crazily how good it was for the time it was created. Now, mobile phones are my favorite thing to bang on about. The power in our mobile phone is incredible, and basically I can make anything a robot because of a mobile phone. But in 2005, that wasn't the case, and we were still doing it. We were still leading the pack in agriculture. So, yeah, it is completely possible. It is happening. It is coming through. It will be high value crops first, i.e. the lettuce example, but it's going to come everywhere. It's going to happen everywhere.
And one of the times I was up visiting, one of your colleagues told me that very precise drop by drop application of chemical that you've got working in the lab could potentially mean reducing the amount of chemical we need to use by, I think the figure was 99.9.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that part of your question, Karl. Yes, that is true. If you just calculate, right, so at the moment we take a drum of chemical, we put it in a spray and we blanket spray the whole field. And I'm not trying to make that sound really bad because I'm a believer in its outputs. But if we actually go, right, how much of that falls on the leaf that we need to spray? Yeah, it's literally 1%. So we can 99% reduction potentially.
So you could just imagine the impact reducing the amount of chemicals needed in farming by that amount is really potentially completely transformative. Tim, great, you've joined us. I'm sorry that you seem to be doomed to suffer technical problems more than anyone else. So I'm glad you could join us. You've not missed out. Don't worry, we've come to you. In fact, I want to turn next to Dana. So we've heard a bit about robotics and sort of automation, but another area that's really exciting is gene editing. And sort of gene editing and other forms of smart plant breeding have the potential to deliver some really exciting applications in agriculture, from improving resistance to disease, extreme weather, or even letting plants produce things that we can't currently produce by growing them at the moment. So if you sort of allow your imagination to run a bit wild, looking ahead, what are the most exciting potential applications you can see, the ones that really capture the imagination?
I think your question kind of has, it's got two parts really. There's the aspect of having plants as factories, making things that we can't otherwise make. And then there's having plants that are better, and better in terms of growing in a field to produce the thing that we already grow them for, the food that we eat, or the product that comes out of it. You know, the flour, the whether it's the seed, the building material, the prettiness of it. And so kind of, there's two halves of that, right? So there's the thing that we ought to do. We ought to make plants more resilient. We know that the challenges of climate change, loss of pesticides, loss of herbicides, they're going to impact our yields. We know that in the future, we're not going to be it's not going to be as easy to produce the same types of food and the same amount of food as we do now. So it's really important that we do that work to make sure that our crops that grow are resilient, are reliable. And on the other side of it, I think the possibilities of using plants as factories is, for me, as somebody who's really a hardcore plant geneticist, and somebody with really kind of no farming background, I think the idea of using plants as something to make us a product that we otherwise can't make is brilliant. I think that the possibilities there are exciting, but we can't be overwhelmed with the possibility of exciting science without doing the necessary science as well. So I think if I were to have to choose one or the other, it would be really challenging. It's kind of doing the work that you ought to do versus the work that you really want to do. So I think that, we really kind of do have to balance that. I think in a world where we are relatively food secure, where we have strawberries all year round, then making the opportunities available for making plants as factories is worthwhile. But for the rest of the world that isn't very food secure, we still have to do that.
I take your point that actually probably the low hanging fruit, the stuff that is most urgent to work on, is some of the basic things around making plants more resilient, especially with climate change, where we're going to have to try and get plants to survive in climates that they weren't used to. One of the exciting suggestions I've heard, certainly one of the examples I've heard of where plants could be engineered to produce things that they don't currently, is fish oil, where you could take plants that produce vegetable oil today, plants in the oilseed rape family, and tweak their genes so they produce fish oil. And that obviously is a much cheaper way than sending people out on boats to catch fish, but also much safer. It's obviously a risky business putting people out on boats. So is that a realistic example?
It's not only realistic; it's happening. I mean, we have the capability to create fish oils in camelina, and we have GM trials that are under our very highly controlled GM field trials here at Rothamsted, where we're producing those plants. And the idea behind this, it's not just the can we do it thing. But currently, what we're doing is we all know that aquaculture is really important and a more sustainable way of getting fish. However, in order to get those fish to a point at which they're healthy for humans, they need to eat other fish. So what we have to do is we have to go out into the oceans and not only put people at risk, but farm fish. We need to eat fish. So we have to get fish to feed people. So the idea of making a seed, so growing a plant that is relatively small, it's relatively compact, it's a really lovely it's pretty as well, but we can create a product in the plants that then we feed directly to the fish, cuts out all of the ocean part of it, reduces our impact on the environment, and it also reduces our impact on the people and the effort. As you said, it's dangerous. It's also totally not sustainable. Why farm fish to feed people?
I said in my introduction that you're working on smart ways to deal with weeds, and particularly blackgrass. Can you just tell us a bit about that? What are you doing?
Well, in short, I'm trying to understand the genetics of weediness. And what I mean by that is I'm trying to figure out what genes and what proteins allow a plant to become a weed. So we have blackgrass. Blackgrass is this horrible problem in winter cereals all across Western Europe, particularly here in the UK. And its scientific name is Alopecia myricides. Now, there's a sister species that's called Alopecia aqualis, and it's just a plant. It's something that you can find along water's edges here in the UK, and it grows just near the earth. It doesn't grow in our fields. So what are the differences between those two species? They kind of look the same. They have otherwise similar behaviors, but one causes a reduction of, nearly £500 million of income for farmers, and the other is just a plant. So if we could try and figure out the genetics of what makes Alopecia myricides, blackgrass, such a bad weed, not only can we try to find its Achilles heel, its weaknesses, so that we can come up with novel ways of treating it and of killing it, but we can also learn from its strengths. So blackgrass does really well in our agricultural systems. What is it that allows it to do that? Can we use some of those strengths to make better crops? So blackgrass is a really resilient plant, and it actually survives a whole bunch of conditions that wheat doesn't do very well, even though it compatible with wheat. So can we learn from blackgrass as well as find ways to kill it? So by studying the genetics of weediness, we can identify specific genes that we can then use to inform crop breeding programs and novel weed management programs. And I don't mean just designing some new thing, but if we pick a pathway, for instance, if we find that blackgrass has an ACCase that's totally different than wheat, we can target that. So by gaining knowledge of what the weeds are doing, we can then learn from them, and specifically at the level of genetics, because that's specific and it's tractable.
Obviously, we've only scratched the surface of some of the exciting things and applications that are happening in this sort of area of genetic manipulation. But I think we've given a flavour of some of the exciting things that can happen. One of my personal favourite areas is the idea of engineering plants so that they can take the nitrogen in the air and use it to fertilise themselves, because it's crazy to me that we spend a fortune putting nitrogen fertilizer on land when our plants are literally swimming in nitrogen. That, 78% of the air is nitrogen. It's like watering seaweed. When they're swimming in water, it seems crazy. So and again, potentially we could engineer plants like wheat to do what legumes already can do and turn that nitrogen in the air into nitrates that they can absorb. But I want to move on, because we talked sort of with Kit and Dana. We've been talking mainly about arable farming, but let's not forget livestock farming is a really exciting area too, and there's some really cool stuff happening down on the livestock farm. Katharina, tell me a bit about, give me some examples of smart technology applied in livestock farming today.
Yes, absolutely. So we're entering the wonderful world of precision livestock farming, which basically enables the utilization of all sorts of exciting technologies on farm for better productivity, sustainability, sustainable livestock production, also increased animal health, increased animal welfare, and these technologies also help to reduce the environmental impact. So there's really a wide range of examples. So I'm going to just go through 3 species. So there's really exciting technologies that are already on the market for dairy, pigs and poultry. So for example, a very classic example and work I've been involved in personally is the sensor technologies in dairy farming, where there's the ability to put sensors in the form of a collar or around the leg on a cow, which provides a range of data. Usually these sensors, for example, are accelerometer based to measure activities, and this can then be translated into specific animal behaviors via the help of algorithms. So we can actually measure a lot of things, and the farmer can even get a warning of what is happening with the animals on farm. A classical example of this is detecting whether a cow is in heat, for example, and very common also is to detect a cow that is lame on farm. So these sensor technologies really help to on the health and welfare side of animals.
I've heard these.
And then I know Kit has already.
I was going to say, I've heard these things described as Fitbits for cows. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep. So you have Fitbits. You've got other technologies like Ice Cube, for example, which is like a leg sensor. So gives information on what is the right time to artificially inseminate a cow, when is she coming into heat, how much time does she spend lying or standing, is there an issue with lameness, and then some of these sensors can then be multiple sensors, and this is really a thing of the future that is coming, that we not only measure one thing, but a wide variety of things. So then we will start to be able to look at the internal temperature of the cow, and all sorts of other aspects, her location, for example, in the future. Come to that in a minute. And the other thing is then obviously the robotics, which are really interesting. So we already spoke about the milking robots. And yes, they provide a wealth of information, but one of the main points for me is that it's really a marvelous animal welfare tool, because we are all actually giving the cows autonomy. She can come and get milked when she decides to. And this is actually something that we are really appreciating in the area of animal welfare, and basically have animals that are happy and healthy. And then we've got robotics in poultry, for example. And in poultry, it's really exciting. So we've got robots that, for example, drive around the farm, scrape the manure off. And we've also got robots that on farm that measure environmental conditions at the same time. There's actually one robot on the market that is a scarifier. So it rotates the litter, which is basically really great for prevention of diseases. And then they monitor all sorts of other aspects like humidity, temperature, airflow, and so on. And finally, we've got the pigs. And you will realize I talk a lot about the indoor farming systems, because these technology are much more easily applicable to the indoor farming systems. So in pigs, for example, we've got all these automated feeding systems where the sows can walk in to a feeding system, and she gets identified via an electronic transponder and gets exactly the right amount of food dispensed to her. And these automatic feeding systems, for example, in the pig industry, can expand to the entire farm, sort of like applying a fully automated feeding systems, looking at finished pigs or weaning pigs. So there's all sorts out there already at the moment that is really interesting.
I'm glad you we're talking about some of the benefits. I'm glad you mentioned animal welfare, because that, people, that's often overlooked. People talk about productivity, but actually one of the exciting things is a lot of these new technologies are not just good for production, they're good for the planet and for animal welfare and all the other good things that we increasingly realize are really important.
Yes, absolutely.
You started to talk about the future, so I'm interested to see, what are you most excited about looking ahead? Again, like, as with Dana, let your imagination fly a bit. What sort of things might we be able to see down on the farm in 10 years' time?
Yeah, there are a few really interesting things out there. And I mentioned previously, at the moment with the precision livestock technology, it's quite focused on the indoor intensive system. But in the future, we are already working on technology that enables to use that can be used in extensive livestock systems, such as sheep and beef system, where the animals are sort of like distributed over a long area. So things that we'll be hopefully seeing more in the future are things like GPS collars, where we will know where the animals are at any point. And even things like combination collars that include GPS, accelerometers, cool things like to measure magnetic fields and gyroscopes, and all these sensors work together to give a wealth of information. And what we really struggled in the path with is sort of like the batteries of sensors to be able to use the extensive systems, but the technologies are getting so much better. So in the future, we're hoping to see more technologies in the extensive farming sector as well. And then we've got really cool things like facial recognition. For example, so there's work, for example, going on up in Scotland using facial recognition in pigs, and they use machine learning to analyze those facial expressions of pigs, for example. So in the future, a farmer might be, this is a little bit of a way in the future. There might be a warning system on farm where a sow's facial or pig's facial expressions get analyzed automatically, and the farmer will get a warning and will then be, okay, my animal might be in pain. There's another behavioral issue sort of like emerging, and sort of actually identifying emotional states rather than sort of like physiological or behavioral measures, which is really, really exciting. And we're making good progress. Some of that research already can actually recognize the facial recognition works 97% of the time, which is really good in scientific terms. But they're now looking to see whether actually we can actually identify those emotional states as well. And so that's really exciting. And a really interesting area is thermography, looking at temperature changes using thermography inside the animal, which obviously can alert to disease and environmental issues as well. And I guess finally talking about the drones again, because drones, you can obviously go up in the sky and you can film and you can have thermography sensors in them. Really interesting with the livestock, because some scientists have already trained sheep to follow a drone. So it could potentially be one day a herding system. Also, drones could be used to fly over flocks and actually locate them in extensive systems. So all these sort of things. I'm not saying there's no challenges associated with those. There's many challenges, but there's certainly a very exciting future.
That's a fantastic sort of quick run through of some of the exciting areas. I love the idea of facial recognition of pigs, and I look forward to seeing the future TV program, One Man and His Drone. Tim, can I turn to you now? So in the last sort of half an hour, we've just had a run through of a whole list of really exciting areas of science and technology that could be really transformational in farming. And obviously the challenge is, how do we make this actually happen on farm? How do we get the technology onto the farm? And how do we make sure that we've got the skills in place to make sure we can make the most of them? So I guess my question to you as the Deputy Director at Defra is, what's the role of government in all this to make this turn into reality?
Well, thanks, Karl. And we've already heard of some fantastic examples of how farming is such a cool profession to get into, and the government alone, can't make it a cool profession to get into. But we are working with lots of farming organisations to look at how we can make it more attractive, and also. So I think the first bit is about how we make it an attractive industry, and I think traditionally farming and horticulture has probably been perceived as a fairly low tech, low skilled kind of profession. I think we've heard now that it's not an exciting profession to get into, and we're working with the industry to. Particularly a group called the Skills Leadership Group, which is looking at where the skills gaps are, what we need to do, trying to invest more in agri-tech. I can say more about that if you want, but also just trying to get that message across that it's not just growing and rearing animals. To be a farmer, you have to be a businessman or woman. We want more diversity in agriculture. You have to be a staff manager, you have to be a bit of scientist as well, physicist, biologist, chemist, as well as an environmentalist, a bit of engineering. It's really exciting. And so with the industry, we're working up where those skills are, and hopefully there'll be an announcement soon about trying to setting up an institute for agriculture and horticulture.
Sorry, I turned my microphone off there. I was just saying, Tim, you're very quiet, so I don't know if you can turn your sound up. And if the reason my microphone was turned off was that I was hoping that would enable us to hear Tim better. So maybe the rest of us can turn our microphones off while Tim is speaking, so there's less background noise. Sorry, Tim, I interrupted you. You're still mid-flow.
No, that's okay. Maybe is that a bit better? Yeah. Okay. So I was just explaining some of the work we're doing with industry to try and make it more exciting, and hopefully there'll be an announcement soon about professionalise the industry and setting up an institute for agriculture and horticulture, which will try and sort of identify those skills gaps and give some sort of career path and career development for anybody wanting to get into the industry. And then I think your question was also about how we get these skills from the kind of laboratory into the marketplace. And I think that's a really important question. Last year I went up to Harper and saw Kit on a very wet October trying to get the fields ready for hands-free farm, and some really exciting stuff going on. But there's no point in doing that unless we can actually try and get it into the marketplace. So we are putting a lot of effort into what we call knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer. There's loads of really good examples of this going on. The Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, AHDB, do this. There's plenty of other organisations that have development farms. The agri-tech centres have this. AHDB's monitor farms and strategic farms are brilliant ways of farmers getting together, learning from each other, but also just trying to get that exchange of knowledge from the bench into the marketplace. So I think the future's looking pretty good, Karl, I'd say.
Remember to turn my microphone back on. Thanks, Tim. That area of having career paths into agriculture, I think, is really important because, it is going to be important to draw people from pools that maybe we didn't in future. You get to see, because you're sort of looking at the whole broad arena of agriculture, you get to see the full breadth of the developments that are happening. What do you see as the most exciting opportunities for British agriculture over the next few years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're clearly we've left the EU. The transition period ends at the end of this month, and clearly, there's still lots of discussions going on about whether there'll be a trade deal with the EU. But looking beyond that, I'm very optimistic. If you think about the way that we're paying far more attention now to the food we eat, how it's grown. Climate change is coming up the agenda. The environment is coming up the agenda. Also, I think the future looks pretty good with if we've got a new generation of people coming through who are interested in all those things I mentioned before, plus the environmental agenda. I think there's plenty of opportunities there for us to be optimistic.
So you talk about the next generation. That leads me nicely onto you, Josie. So you're a fresh graduate. You just graduated this year from Harper Adams, and have just started working in the industry. First of all, tell me what are you doing now?
So lucky me, I am just a graduate coming out of university at a very turmoil time. But I've been fortunate enough to actually spend 3 months in Basel, Switzerland, working for Syngenta with their sustainable agriculture team. So it's been a fantastic opportunity to be out there, but quite happy to be home for the Christmas months. So currently I'm doing a lot of work with the NFU as one of their student and young farmer ambassadors for the next year, and just looking for my next career opportunity really that's out there.
So I'm keeping turning my microphone off. So I hope people have realised from listening to what we've heard so far that there are a huge range of roles available now in agriculture that go far beyond what happens on the farm. So thinking about you and your peers as coming up to graduate, what were some of the options that you were all considering and that were available to you as new graduates in the whole field of agriculture?
Exactly. I think that's the thing to remind people, that there is such a broad array of paths that you can go down coming out of university as a graduate. For example, if you take sort of my small group of my final year household, I've got friends that have gone back off to the family farm. I've got friends that are doing graduate roles, so a trainee analyst, for example, in HDB, or a digital marketing within an agricultural machinery company. So there's lots of different pathways to take and lots of different careers to take. And it's not just essentially one role fits all. I mean, even from myself, I'm trying to find my footing in companies and roles that might suit what I'm interested in and in doing, really. But yeah, it's just interesting to see that there's lots of sons and daughters who are going to university to try and further their knowledge and find new career options out there that potentially take them away from the farm and into maybe a retailer or an agronomist or something different.
So I'm hoping that over the course of today, we'll have inspired some people who maybe in the past wouldn't have thought about agriculture as a place to apply their skills. And I'm talking from a very personal viewpoint here. I graduated in physics a long time ago now. And if you'd said to me back then, what about agriculture? I'd have laughed. I wouldn't have seen any way of applying my skills. Whereas actually I was wrong then, and I'm absolutely wrong now. There's almost any science and engineering discipline you could think of, there's something really exciting to do with it in agriculture. So what would you say to people who perhaps as a result of hearing things today are really interested in what they've heard? What is it about agriculture that makes it a great sector?
I mean, everyone sort of hit the nail on the head today from the talks I've been listening to, that there's so much skill and talent needed in the industry, and it's out there. People are coming up with great ideas to put into practice every day, but we need them people to enter the industry to put it into place. And there are some fantastic people out there that just maybe haven't considered a career in agriculture, maybe because it's not been spoken about in schools, and it's just sort of getting that knowledge out there so that people really do think, okay, I can go into sustainability, I can go into engineering, and it can have that connection with ag, and we can sort of gather them skills that are really needed and in really high demand at the minute.
Have I turned my sound off? No, I'm still on. Oh, good. I'm looking at the questions now. We're sort of coming towards the end of the session, so I want to try and address some of the questions that are coming up in the in the discussion. One of them is about the application of artificial intelligence in farming. Maybe Kit, that's something you might want to say something on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of said a bit about that earlier, about the sense that we're using it to say learn about weed identification, things like that. You talked about blackgrass, Karl. If I look at blackgrass and then I look at wheat, I'm not a crop scientist. I go, it's two grasses to me, but I know people who've trained AI systems that can tell the difference. So we can turn everyone, again, my favorite thing, the mobile phone, by giving, by producing, literally apps that run on a phone, we can turn everybody into a weed scientist. You take a photo and it tells you what's there. So AI is 100% happening in farming, and is a massive field. Do we have people who are traditionally coming through ag colleges and universities who are experts in AI? No, because we probably don't run courses in that. So we need people who've studied computer science degrees to come into our industry, come and use their knowledge to generate our AI engines. Saying that, I now do have students who are trying to create AI, but it's only just happening, whereas we can bring in people from other industries to do that. There was a question in the list about, as a science graduate, what should I do to get into agriculture? Obviously, I work at a university, so come and study a master's to specialize in an area of agriculture is what you should do. But if you don't want to do more study, then get some experience, get onto a farm. Even if you don't want to be a farmer on a farm, get onto a farm, learn about the different areas, learn about what interests you. And then there is, buy your magazine, buy the Farmers Weekly, look through. There are hundreds of companies out there working in this space, so get an understanding of what you want to do. Is it livestock related? Is it crop related? Have a look at the companies that exist. Some of the biggest companies in the world are agricultural companies, and start chucking people's CVs. Be proactive. That's what I'd say to that person. There was a question there somewhere. Something I didn't say earlier is from my world, Karl, in terms of engineering, I'm really excited about how at the moment agricultural engineering is sometimes used as a lot of the time used as saying something's bad. If something's agricultural in an engineering sense, that's generally seen as a bad thing. I have spent my career so far trying to defend the word agricultural engineering, and going forwards, it's generally because we use big iron to do our job. But going forwards, we're not going to be using big iron anymore. We're going to be using carbon fiber and maybe graphene at some point. So, doesn't matter what background you have, there is a place in agricultural engineering, and there's a place in agriculture as well.
And Dana, what would you say to someone who's been inspired by some of the things that you were talking about earlier? What sort of the career paths and opportunities that people might consider in those areas?
In terms of, genetics is one of those things that is pretty academic in its not only in its pathways, but it's also its applications. But there's lots and lots of universities that do genetics, do molecular biology, do biochemistry. My background is definitely not anything to do with agriculture, but I see the opportunities there. So the thing is that plants are plants, and when it comes down to it, all living things have DNA, RNA, proteins. So when you have that understanding of how things work at a molecular basis, then what you apply it to doesn't really matter anymore. However, with agriculture, what you have is a really direct and necessary thing that needs to be fixed. We all will need to eat forever and ever. And so therefore, once we've solved that problem, then many of the other problems come around to it. There was some discussion earlier on about meeting the needs of the world. And much of it comes back to food. So if we can solve food, if we can make food available and sustainable and nutritious, then many other things will follow.
Katharina, would you like to add anything? Again, it's interesting that a lot of the technologies that you were describing earlier, I guess the key skills that you need to work in those fields aren't necessarily agricultural knowledge. No. It's about understanding electronics and software engineering. So I'm assuming that there are lots of opportunities to people who maybe have gone quite a way through education without having any link with agriculture, but who can apply the skills they're learning into an agricultural area.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for example, I'm program manager of our MSc in Agricultural Technology and Innovation, and we get a lot of students from software development backgrounds or engineering backgrounds or even business backgrounds that are looking to move into the agricultural technology business. So they are doing that kind of course. So obviously there is the opportunity of going to university and study some more in that area to help to get into this area. There are lots of sort of like organizations out there that are really interested and that can help with these things as well. And also just like, as Kit said, pick up the Farmers Weekly and, learn some more about agriculture, get sort of like the basic knowledge and sort of like take it from where, do some work experience in agriculture. Always important.
Thanks very much. We're at the end of our time. I'd just like to add, as someone personally who doesn't come from an agricultural background, it's an absolutely fascinating place to work. And as a journalist, if you're looking for an exciting field to cover, I can't think of anywhere where there's more cool stuff happening at the moment than agriculture. So I want to thank all of my panel members for taking part. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you to all of you. There were over 200 of you at one point listening into the discussion. I'm hoping that at least some of you will have been inspired by what you've heard, if not in the session just now, then in some of the other sessions today. So I'm looking forward. I've said in an earlier session, the thing that made me a physicist, maybe do physics at university, was watching Neil Armstrong land on the moon, and that captured my imagination. And I'm hoping that in the course of today, we'll have done the same thing to some young minds, captured their imagination about the really exciting stuff happening in agriculture today, whatever field of science and technology you're interested in. So hopefully there's a few people who are in 10, 20 years time are going to be working in some of these areas and making some of the really exciting developments that are going to take us the next step forward. So thank you all panelists for taking part. Thank you to everyone who joined and submitted questions. And we've still got, I think, a little bit more to, I think the New Scientist Live is now closing, but I hope you've all had a really interesting day today. So thank you all very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.